From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. What's happening tonight in Libya is being called a deadly endgame. Gadhafi spoke again today, another strange speech. He threatened to turn his nation into a red flame. He promised to release the weapons in his arsenal to the rebels fighting for him. He also told people to dance and sing. The evacuation of Americans is over. They got out safely today on a charter flight and a ferry boat. Tonight, most of them are there in Malta. And for the first time, we have someone inside Tripoli in Libya tonight. So we begin with the reporting of NBC's Bill Neely.
In the heart of his capital, a dictator defiant. Muammar Gadhafi, ever the showman, determined to rally what's left of his support. It's the first time he's dared take to the streets since the rebellion against him began. And here he was in Green Square, where his men had killed protesters, threatening more violence. I will open my arsenal, he told them. You'll have all the guns you need. The time has come. Libya will become a red flame. They are words that spell more trouble, and there was trouble enough today. Not far from where he spoke, the sound of gunfire. His people scattering. The video is shaky, the crackdown is not. Across Tripoli there were many reports of police or men in plain clothes confronting demonstrators. They say many died, but it's impossible to confirm how many. The clashes began as hundreds of thousands left Friday prayers in mosques across Tripoli. There had been calls for the crowds to merge and mount a massive protest demonstration. Gaddafi's men were determined not to allow this, and they struck with brutal force. It's a regime that looks confident, at least judging by the wink of Gaddafi Jr. This is Saif, the colonel's son, and once his heir apparent. Here, spelling out his vision, his future.
Plan A is to live and die in Libya. Plan B is to live and die in Libya. Plan C is to live and die in Libya.
The Gaddafis appear determined not to back down. Colonel Gaddafi has been defiant and isolated before, but never like this. Never cornered in his own country. Bill Neely, NBC News, Tripoli.
And now to those evacuated Americans. Their escape by ferry boat was delayed by high seas, but they arrived a few hours ago in Malta on board the boat that had been chartered by the U.S. NBC's Martin Fletcher is at the harbor where that ship came in. Martin, good evening.
Brian, this was the end of a nightmare. Trapped in Libya, then trapped on a boat. But tonight, tired and happy, 167 Americans and 118 other nationals reached safety here in Malta. As the Maria Dolores, a 200-foot catamaran chartered by the US government, docked in Malta, you could feel the sigh of relief. First off, the sick, and the elderly, and the children. They'd been stuck on the boat for 60 hours. The seas were too rough to sail. No beds, nowhere to go, barely enough food, but not a word of complaint.
We're happy to be here. We are beyond words happy to be here.
Donald Hemphill from Peoria, Illinois, escaped from Libya a week ago. He came to greet his colleagues from Acon.
Well, at least on the boat they were safe and had food and water.
There was humour too, Irish wit.
I spent my life waiting for my ship to come in, and if the ship to come out was the one that counted more, I think.
But what they escaped from wasn't so funny.
We got stopped by our militia with AK-47s, rocket grenades going over our place, explosions.
Another 100 or so Americans flew to Turkey.
The security circumstances in Tripoli were such that it was impossible for anyone but really a handful of people to reach our plane.
That leaves about 300 more Americans still in Libya, among more than 100,000 foreigners trying to leave. Children were tired, no surprise. This boy had one word to describe his ordeal.
Rough.
And this young mother summed it up best of all. How are you guys?
We're fine.
Yeah?
We're very grateful to be here. Yeah.
Everyone we spoke to praised the US officials and the ferry line, and they couldn't wait to go home. But one woman was still scared for the Libyan friends she left behind.
course, a little bit of happiness to come out of this. Martin Fletcher in Malta tonight. Martin, thank you. And now to our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who remains inside Libya. He made his way into the headquarters of the anti-Gaddafi rebel operation today. He's live again tonight from what is the unofficial rebel capital, the city of Benghazi. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. There are now effectively two Libyas, one based here in Benghazi, the other in Tripoli, and they are locked in this deadly struggle. As Gaddafi held his state-sponsored rally, his government offered Libyans money, hundreds of dollars per family, and raises of 150% for some state employees. Many in the Libyan opposition showed contempt. They don't want Gaddafi's money and cut his picture from the bill. But today was Gaddafi's day to try to win back the people, to try to prove blatantly false claims that the protesters are al-Qaeda-led drug addicts. State television today broadcast an alleged confession. But his statements appeared to be prompted from off-camera. And in Benghazi, the unofficial capital of the opposition, no one is even paying attention to it. Instead, demonstrators were out in force, singing and dancing on a tank captured from the army. Thousands of protesters are out to celebrate, but also to taunt Gaddafi. They're saying, bring on the planes and mercenaries, we're ready to fight. And more images are emerging that show the extent of the fighting so far, including possible atrocities.
Sit down.
Documenting the violence is Mohammed Zaidan. Zaidan is a former state TV reporter, now with the rebels. He's collecting hundreds of photographs and videos. Most are difficult to look at. These are dead bodies.
Yeah, dead bodies.
As we looked at images of Libyans killed execution style, Zaidan grew increasingly upset. One of the victims was a friend from college.
It's killed my people.
In this burned out courthouse, now the opposition headquarters, volunteers are gathering evidence of what they call war crimes, hoping one day to bring Gaddafi's regime to justice. Now, have you been able to put... Protesters have been waiting for a strong message from Washington. Written in graffiti on the wall at that protester headquarters today, it said that President Obama must choose between the Libyan people or Gaddafi. Brian?
Richard Engel in the city of Benghazi in Libya tonight. Richard, thank you. Gaddafi's son said further tonight, by the way, Tripoli is calm, and this is all the work of terrorists. Back here in the U.S., the White House turned up pressure on Libya today, and there was an extraordinary scene at the UN late today. NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell watching it all from our Washington newsroom tonight. Andrea, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. As soon as American diplomats and civilians were safely out of Libya, the White House announced it will impose sanctions on Muammar Gaddafi and declared he has zero legitimacy after attacking his own people. Galvanized by the bloodshed in Libya, the UN Security Council heard a dramatic plea for help from Libya's ambassador.
Please, United Nations, save Libya. No to bloodshed, no to killing of innocents.
It was a rare display of emotion for the UN, as his fellow ambassadors got up to embrace the Libyan diplomat, and the UN Secretary General called for a broad range of sanctions against Gaddafi's government. In Geneva, the UN's Human Rights Council applauded Libya's diplomats as they defected to the opposition. The Council voted today to investigate Libya for human rights abuses and called for Libya's suspension from the Human Rights Council. At the White House, President Obama decided to close the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli, suspend limited military cooperation, freeze arms sales, and the Treasury Department sent this advisory to banks to be on the lookout for any movement of Gaddafi's money. This as they prepare to freeze his assets, perhaps as soon as tomorrow. The British and Swiss already have.
It's clear that Colonel Gaddafi has lost the confidence of his people.
The White House still stopped short of calling for Gaddafi's ouster. France's President Sarkozy was tougher.
Monsieur Gaddafi doit partir.
He said Mr. Gaddafi must leave.
We shouldn't kid ourselves. Sanctions, asset freezing, travel limits, and the rest are not the sort of tools that are going to turn a situation like this around.
Until the money runs out, until the mercenaries run out, until those family members who control security units around Gaddafi decide that he has to go, and that may well not happen, there's not a whole lot we're going to do.
Libya free! Still in Washington today, at their residence, Libyan diplomats raised the old Libyan flag from before Gaddafi's rule.
Although NATO met today to consider a no-fly zone over Libya, most military officials believe that constant air patrols are simply too difficult to implement. The president is likely to sign the sanction order tomorrow, and Secretary Clinton heads to Geneva Sunday. But none of these diplomatic options are expected to be enough to finally force Gaddafi to give up. Brian?
Andrea Mitchell on the story tonight from Washington. Andrea, thanks. The demand for change, people-led change, spilled into the streets again today, all across the Arab world, calling for a day of rage. From the largest protests yet in Bahrain to tens of thousands in Yemen, big crowds in the streets of Cairo, and also in Iraq, of all places, where the protests turned violent. At least 10 people were killed in showdowns with riot police in Baghdad and a handful of other cities across Iraq. We've been watching oil prices here all week as they've rocketed higher because of this instability in Libya. The week closed out on a fairly quiet note, though crude was up another 60 cents, closing near $98 a barrel. That price, by the way, is up 14% from just last week. Defense Secretary Robert Gates is making headlines tonight for something he said today in a speech to the Corps of Cadets at West Point. The man in charge of the Pentagon during our two wars issued a surprisingly blunt warning against any more American wars like Iraq and Afghanistan.
In my opinion, any future defense secretary who advises the president to again send a big American land army into Asia or into the Middle East or Africa should have his head examined, as General MacArthur so delicately put it.
Gates was hired by President Bush in late '06 to take over the war effort in Iraq that started under Donald Rumsfeld. President Obama kept him on when he took office.